Welcome back. In this video, we're going to continue creating our generator nodes by creating a surface distortion node. So the whole purpose of this node is to create very subtle distortion on the surface of an object to affect the reflections of that object. So you'll see this if you ever look at a skyscraper in an image, especially any kind of moving image, and you see how the windows are not completely flat. There's quite a bit of warping going on there, and that affects the surface of those. Also, pretty much any time you see a flat metal plate or plastic or anything like that, it's going to have very subtle distortion on the surface. You very rarely get a completely mirror finish, except possibly on mirrors. So let's get to work on this. Let's add in a new mesh. Let's add in a plane. And I'm just going to scale this up a little bit, just so that it's taking up a little bit more space. And let's apply the scale there using Control A to apply all those scales. Let's add a new material to that. And let's take the metallic all the way up. And let's take the roughness all the way down on that. Let's just make sure that we are in cycles. And you can see that I've changed the background image to just any HDRI. And you can just turn off Scene World to get access to that. And that's going to allow us to see the distortion on the surface. So at the moment we have pretty much a perfect mirror finish. Our HDRI is quite pixelated, but you can see we have quite a nice mirror finish there. I'll maybe add just a little touch of roughness, just for a little bit more realism on this piece of metal. And let's get to work on our node group. So this is going to be a very, very simple one. It's essentially just a noise map. And we just want to control how that affects the bump. So let's add in a vector bump map. And let's plug this into our normals. Plug our factor into our height. And let's add in some mapping coordinates. And you can see there what we're getting is almost like water. So a couple of things. The scale's far too high. Let's change that to 1. And straight away that's a little bit better, but it's still very strong. Now we could go into something like strength and use that to affect this, or we could even use distance to affect this. You can see they both have a very similar effect. But what I want to do is keep strength and distance at 1 just now and use a different effect. What I want to do is, instead of having this noise map being so contrasty, let's take that and make it a little bit more subtle. Let's use a map range node to do that, and let's just plug it in here. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to change these minimum and maximum values. So I'm going to take this to something like 0.4 and take the maximum to something like 0.6. So it's much more subtle. Let's have a look at our result. You can see there straight away our distortion is much more subtle. Now we need to turn this into a node group now. We're going to include this bump node. So let's grab these 4 nodes and hit Ctrl G, and we turn those into a node group. Okay, so it's challenge time. Now that we've grouped the nodes that we want in our node group, I want you to try and decide which are the most suitable inputs and outputs for your surface distortion node. Try and think about which ones would be most useful when using this practically, and try and pick appropriate default minimum and maximum values too. Now don't worry if you add in the wrong nodes or you miss anything out. You can always remove any additional nodes or add in any that you missed. So pause the video, have a go at that, and join me in a moment and I'll show you how I would create it. Okay, so I hope you got on okay with that challenge. Let's move along and add some of these inputs and outputs to this node group. Now, just in case we need it, I'm going to take this noise texture and make that one of the outputs. Let's open up our little tab at the side here and go to group, and we'll change this to noise. And in our inputs, let's see, what do we need? Well, one of those things that I think we should use is a location. The location is really useful for animating these values, and that could be quite useful for a number of different instances. So we're going to use these locations, but I'm not going to use a vector for these locations. I'm going to use a combine XYZ, which will plug into our location. So you can see vector to vector, and now we have just float values, and we'll just plug these values in. And I think it's safe to say that we'll remember what those do, but just in case someone else uses the node, let's just put location in front of each of these different letters. Go in front of X, in front of Y, and in front of Z. I don't think we'll need to worry about rotation. We will take the noise scale, and we will take the noise distortion. Now, as far as the detail and the roughness goes, I don't think I actually want much of that anyway, but we'll take the detail just in case. In the map range node, we could use controls to affect these minimum and maximum values, but I don't think we'll have to worry too much about that. And let's just take this strength value as well. Now let's just double check each of these different settings. Let me just make a little bit more space here. So let's take our scale. At the moment we have that set to 1, minimum and maximum values. Let's take those to 0, and yeah, let's keep 1000 in there. Distortion, again, we'll just keep those defaults. Detail, we'll keep a default of 2, minimum, maximum of 15 should be fine. And strength, 0 to 1. So this is going to be the maximum distortion that we have. And I think that's a decent maximum. I don't think we'd have to go any higher than that. And I don't think we need to worry about distance either. So that's essentially our distortion node group. So let's just give this a new name. We'll rename that in the label, which changes the name up here. And we'll also rename it here. Okay, so now we have our node. Now, as always, we have to make sure this is marked as an asset. Now, I'm using the node group.blend file, which does mean that I already have my UV distortion marked as an asset. And if you don't see this window, remember that we go to Blender File instead of View Layer. This is your regular view, but we're using Blender File to access all the node groups in this file. We are just going to right click and mark this as an asset. And we just have to make sure that we save this, and it is saved in our Asset Browser Node Groups folder. Now, obviously, you might have yours saved in a different folder. That's perfectly fine. Now you should be able to access this from any Blender file as long as you have that asset browser set up. Now in the next video, we're going to move on and create a roughness generation node. I'll see you then.